Welcome to Align and Act. I'm so glad that everyone's here. As those who have been at our previous gatherings know, this is a somewhat different gathering. We've been in large places, and today we're in a beautiful place with a dome. This year, as we enter the next phase of the Grad Nation campaign, what we wanted to do was bring together really the leaders of this effort for a day of serious and honest talk about where we are and where we need to go. We've got a good day planned, I think. We'll start with our friends John Bridgeland and Bob Balfanz talking about the new Building Grad Nation Report, which you may have seen something about one place or another. They'll give us a little briefing. We'll have a little conversation with John and Bob after that. Then we're going to turn to a session in which, and that by the way will be webcast, so we'll have a couple of funny little moments during the day when we're stopping because we have to get the webcast on or not on, so just bear with us on that. And then we'll have a session looking at some of the things that are working around the country at various age levels and various kinds of intense interventions in communities. That'll be terrific. After a break for lunch, we'll have General Powell and Bob Putnam, Professor Bob Putnam from Harvard, the author of Our Kids, talking about the opportunity gap and what we might do about that opportunity gap. Then we'll be joined by Secretary Duncan for a nice session in the afternoon, and we'll close with a session talking about the challenges that face young men of color. So I think that's a good day's work for all of us. I know that a lot of folks here use social media. I know that because I follow you. But we also want to have an honest conversation today. So I've seen people use this approach at other meetings to good effect, which is anything said from the stage, fair game. Anything said from the floor, let's don't broadcast that so people can be honest and ask good questions or make provocative comments. But anything said from the stage, feel free to broadcast. And we will be, there's a whole stream of MacBook Airs back there with people live tweeting things and whatever all happens. So none of any of this would be happening today or in general if it weren't for our partners and friends and sponsors. So we have terrific support. I want to thank especially, well, there it is. Is it on the screen there? Yeah, well, okay, so I don't even really have to read them, but I want to especially thank AT&T and the Ford Foundation, the Ritz-Carlton Hotel Company, Target, and Voya Financial. And I also want to give a shout out to Southwest Airlines. Some of you, I think, got here because Southwest Airlines is the official sponsor of America's Promise Alliance. And last but not least, I need to say, and I want to say, thank you to colleagues at America's Promise Alliance, the Everyone Graduate Center, and at Civic Enterprises. Those of you who have put on meetings and who go to meetings and put out reports know that a lot of people really knock themselves out to make things like this happen and happen well. And there's a crew at America's Promise, and there's a crew at Civic Enterprises, and there's a crew at the Everyone Graduate Center at Johns Hopkins, and all of them have been knocking themselves out for weeks right now. So I want to give them a shout out. So we're now about to begin the webcast, and that means I am going to introduce my friend and my boss and our leader, Alma Powell. Ms. B?
Thank you, John. Good morning, everybody. Good morning. Thank you so much for coming to be with us here today for the announcing our 6th annual Building a Grad Nation Report. Back in 2010, when we released the first report on graduation rates, we made a lot of headlines. And there was a lot of talk generated, and a couple of reactions to that stood out with me and stay with me. Marguerite Kondracki, who was our CEO at the time, said, this information shows that, this report shows that progress is possible against all odds. And that explains the Grad Nation campaign and describes it accurately. But rather than tell you about our progress, let's look and see it here on the video. As I watch those milestones rolling across the screen there, it really made me smile as I think about how we came to each one of those. Before the Grad Nation campaign began, on-time graduation rates were hovering at just about 70% for 30 years. This fact had been made known to people many years before, and everybody said, "Oh, isn't that awful?" And then they forgot about it, because we've got ADD. And if we don't keep this fact before us, we will forget and let things slide again. And so with the Grad Nation campaign and the summits, we have been working very hard to keep the issue before everybody, and you can see all the partners that have come together to make this happen. Today, national on-time graduation rates have broken a new record at 81.4% for the first time in America's history. And we are on point and on track to reach 90% by 2020. As we went through the Grad Nation summits, the dropout summits before that, we just kind of ticked them off and said, okay, maybe this is making a difference. We could see excitement around the country at Grad Nation summits, but nothing compared to my excitement the day I got an email from Arnie Duncan that said, "Tonight when I play in the basketball tournament, I will wear the number 80, because for the first time we have reached an 80% graduation rate in our country." And that's thanks to many of you here in this audience, to partners who are here, who are people who are concerned and work diligently. We have 2 of our youth board members here today, and they work at it too. They are the young people whose voices we have to hear and who tell us what things are necessary. Daniel Erickson over here conducted the first youth-led graduation summit down in Florida just recently, and we are very proud of him. So thank you all. So we know that there are a lot of people that have made this progress possible, and this report, of course, comes from the report's co-authors, John Bridgeland from Civic Enterprises and Dr. Bob Balfanz from the Everyone Graduates Center at Johns Hopkins. Without their help, this would not have happened. I especially want to thank AT&T and Target, whose support has made so much of our work, including this report, possible. Now, I said that at the beginning, at the first report, Marguerite's comments stuck with me, but there was another one that we have to always keep in mind. In 2010, a Time magazine education analyst wrote, "Grad Nation is good news, but it's also a wake-up call. It's not the end, it's just the beginning." And so we're celebrating a lot of progress here today, but we also are issuing another wake-up call. Because the fact is that while graduation rates are up as a whole, the story isn't as hopeful if you are a student of color, a student with disabilities, or someone from a low-income home. This research uncovers a great gap, dangerous gaps in graduation rates that put the American dream at risk for millions of young people today. Gaps that, as a nation that stands for equal opportunity and social mobility, we have to consider unacceptable and do what we can to close those gaps. Those gaps will threaten all of our progress. They will undo all of our progress until we start to address them. In 5 years, when people look back at the headlines from 2015, they will say that this report was about high school graduation rates. But this report shows us so much more. It shows us that the same realities keeping young people from graduating are the same realities behind the unrest that we see in our country today. The inequalities fueling the unrest in Baltimore and in Ferguson are the same inequalities that will keep hundreds of thousands of young people from walking across a stage and receiving their diplomas. We are not here today to merely figure out how to raise high school graduation rates. We are here to figure out how to create the conditions of success that every young person in America needs to thrive, not just in America. Young people everywhere need supports in order to thrive. So we thank you so much for joining us in this effort, and we've come a long way. But we have to remember that it will take all of us, each of us, working together to go even further. Now, before we get to the actual report, I would like to introduce someone who has helped make it very possible. AT&T has been with us every step of the way in the Grad Nation campaign. AT&T Aspire has invested $350 million in education so far. AT&T employees are serving as mentors and tutors for more than tens of thousands of young people across the country. And AT&T is the lead sponsor of this report. Nicole Anderson, the President and Executive Director of Philanthropy at AT&T Foundation, is here with us today. Please welcome Nicole.
Thank you, Mrs. Powell, and good morning. It is wonderful to be here again with all of you, and amazing to realize that this is our 6th annual report to the nation on graduation rates. John Bridgeland came to visit me in Dallas last month, and in the course of talking about the report and about this event, he said simply, "Thank you. Thank you for sticking with this goal for so many years." That same thank you I want to extend to all of you this morning. It's very easy to chase the bright, shiny ideas that appear each year in our national discourse, but it's much harder to stick with the audacious goals year in and year out. We are making progress on the goal of a 90% graduation rate because all of you stay dedicated to the cause, and you are here bright and early to reaffirm your commitment. When I stood here last year, I was so encouraged that we'd passed the 80% threshold on graduation rates. As I stand here today, I am anxious that the last 8.6% is going to be tough. Like the last mile of a race, this is the time we need to enhance our strategy. We need to dig in, think innovatively to reach our goal, and push ourselves to the finish line. At AT&T, we know that investing in education now is quite simply one of the best investments we can make in our future. That's why we continue to work through our signature education program, AT&T Aspire, to reach students at risk of not completing high school and connect them to mentors, relevant skills trainings, and new technologies that help improve teaching and learning. And we also know we can't be satisfied with incremental change. So in addition to doing what we've been doing, because we know it works, we decided last year to start making some big bets to drive exponential change. Mentoring students has been core. It's been core part of AT&T Aspire since its launch. And like everyone in this room with me today, we know that having a caring adult mentor in a student's life is key to their success, to his or her success. So we took that information and building upon our Aspire mentoring program, we're working with civic enterprises and Mentor to bring together nonprofits in the mentoring space to collaborate and share best practices. Together, these nonprofits are exploring ways to leverage technology and data to increase their impact through more coordinated interventions for students who need it most. We also began to invest in innovative programs that put technology at the center of their theories of change. So we work with Udacity on the nanodegree program that provides flexible, online, affordable training to prepare students with the skills they need today to be successful in tech careers right away. The nanodegree program is also a pathway we see to potentially help close the opportunity gap. We recently announced an expansion of our nanodegree scholarship program to a total of 1,200 scholarships for students involved with some of the programs we've already funded through Aspire. And 500 of these scholarships will be offered through Year Up, which is a national leader in providing skills training to low-income young adults. We'll be hiring some of these students and can't wait to see the expertise and value they'll bring to AT&T. And knowing technology is the best way to provide anytime, anywhere learning, we invested in Khan Academy. We're collaborating with our learning on the go by supporting Khan's new enhanced mobile learning platform. With more ways and places to learn, there are fewer reasons for students not to do it and not to succeed. And just last year, the inaugural class of the AT&T Aspire Accelerator. This is one I'm very excited about. It's really a new turn in how we look at corporate philanthropy and strategic investing. So following a nationwide open call for applications, 5 ed tech organizations, both for and nonprofit, were selected from hundreds to participate. The 6-month accelerator program will provide financial investment, counseling, access to technology expertise, and mentorship. Each startup uses technology to help students succeed in school and career. And the primary goal, unlike most other accelerators, is making an impact on society rather than monetary return. Yes, there are risks in making these investments, but supporting the most promising cutting-edge education technologies out there is a bet we're willing to make. And I encourage all of you to join us in making some big bets, because we won't cross the finish line if we don't continue to innovate and try new strategies, especially when it comes to the graduation rates of minority, low income, and special needs students. So to talk to us more on this, I now have the great honor and privilege of welcoming Bob Balfanz and John Bridgeland to the stage. Bob and Bridge are our tireless researchers, whom without we couldn't do the work we do. They identify and contextualize the challenges and the solutions to getting to that 90%. Thank you, Bob and Bridge, and please join me in welcoming them.
Good morning. This is so nice this year. It feels more like a family reunion than the cast of thousands, even though it's great to see thousands of people across the country who, as Alma said, you know, the country has ADD, but not on this issue. We're staying with it over the long haul. And I want to call out Russ Rumberger, who 30 years ago was on the dropout issue and has stayed with it literally for 3 decades. Give him a round of applause. So as both Alma and Nicole mentioned, this is our 6th annual update to the nation. So as you can imagine, Bob and I have gotten a little punchy over the years. So this year we're going to try to liven it up with a few sports metaphors. We're thrilled to be here in the Grad Nation Superdome. It's perfect for what we envision. So we're going to pass and toss and pitch and kick you through this presentation. I first want to begin by thanking some critical partners and people. Our coaches and mentors have been General and Mrs. Powell. Mrs. Powell was my mentor after 9/11 and gave me a great deal of strength and ideas, and has just done such extraordinary work on this campaign from the very beginning. Our team captain, John Gompertz, Melinda Hudson, who organized this event today, and their entire team at America's Promise Alliance. We're so thrilled to work with them day in and day out. Also like to thank our members of our team, Governor Bob Wise, who's such a wonderful perspective on what the nation's governors can do, and Phil Lovell, who's working so hard to make sure the reauthorization of No Child Left Behind continues the strength we've had over the last decade to keep us on pace. Also wanted to thank our business manager, sponsor, Charlene Lake, Nicole Anderson, your entire team at AT&T. They're not just a logo up on a screen. They've made an investment of $350 million. And a lot of people in this room, and your wonderful work has benefited. And not only that, they're deploying their workforce all over the country to connect people who work at AT&T with connecting young people to the pathway to a job. I also want to thank Leisha Ward and Reba Dominski at Target. They've been at this for years and years and years. And when you look at their pathway and their investment to support education, it's extraordinary. And I know we'll hear more about that later, so thank you, Leisha and Reba, for all you've done. I also I want the people who wrote this report in partnership with Bob and me to actually stand up, because we got the data late this year. It was like a 24/7 task. Jennifer DePauli from my shop, Aaron Ingram, Kathleen McMahon, Joanna Fox, Mary Mouchard, and Mark and Vaughn all stand up. All 140 pages. I also want to thank, one of the best parts of this work was talking to young people. We had the privilege of doing it in 25 communities across the United States, and it literally changed my life. I still think about Monique in Philadelphia, who wanted to be an astrophysicist and literally was a prostitute on the streets of Philadelphia, and what happened in that journey. And John Zaff and America's Promise have done extraordinary work with Don't Call Them Dropouts. Today, we have LaShawn and Rihanna. Where are you, LaShawn and Rihanna? There they are. From Youth Build, LaShawn and Rihanna, they both went to the same high school. You'll hear their stories interspersed later, but I wanted to call them out because they're featured in our report. And listening to the power of the youth voice, I think actually changed the whole dialogue in this country and put it on the national map. So on to the report, if I can, there we are. I'm going to give you a quick overview of the national playing field. Bob's going to give you both the third quarter analysis and our fourth quarter forecast as we edge up to this 90% graduation rate goal. We're also going to talk about the way forward and follow the evidence. We call it Moneyball for dropout prevention. And warning, we have mixed sports metaphors that will completely confuse you by the end of it, but we hope it doesn't distract from what we want to share. So as Alma mentioned, after 30 years of flatlining, when you read the A Nation at Risk report, you know the one hopeful thing that was highlighted? In the previous 80 years, high school graduation rates were rising. And then in the early 70s, it sort of flatlined, and it stayed there. And as Alma said, we passed the ball. The good news is that we're now at 81.4%. That's an 11 percentage point gain over the last decade. That means 1.8 million more young people in the United States graduated rather than dropping out over the last decade. That's an extraordinary thing when you think of the individual economic, societal benefits, even the fabric of our communities. Young people who graduate from high school vote, they volunteer, they participate in community projects. You think about how that strengthens community fabric. As Alma also mentioned, after 4 U.S. presidents set the exact same goal, a 90% high school graduation rate, and 3 missed it, we're now on pace for the third year in a row to reach the 90% by the class of 2020. I recently was in Dallas. I briefed President George W. Bush personally on the campaign, And he was both so happy that the nation was on pace and we were being accountable for progress, and disappointed that his goal of 2014 had been missed. So I got a little heat on it. The good news is some districts and states with majority low income and minority students are making big gains, which shows this is not an issue that's driven by demography or economics or social trends alone. This is more about those schools, school districts, schools, and communities that focus on the problem. There are also large and persistent opportunity gaps. Are we truly going to be a grad nation? Or are we going to be two nations? Is it going to be my kids? Is it going to be our kids, as Bob Putnam urges us, or is it going to be my kids and their kids? And I think that's the challenge before us. So we have some all-stars this year. Minority students, Hispanic and Latino students had 15 percentage point gains over the last measurable 6 years, and African Americans had 9 percentage point gains, increases in high school graduation rates. We also, under the cohort, can show for the first time that Hispanic Americans are on pace to reach the 90% high school graduation rate goal if they continue the gains they've had over the last 3 years. African Americans have to accelerate their progress by at least an additional percentage point in the coming years to remain on pace. I also note that the number of dropout factories has been almost cut in half, and the students attending them, both Hispanics and African Americans, have been more than cut in half. So this year, there's some fabulous new analysis, and I want to call out Ross Santee. There are people in government and public service who do great work every day. He works at the National Center for Education Statistics. They make this data possible. Show us that there are 124 school districts in the United States with high numbers of low-income and minority students that had triple the gains of the national average. These are places like Cincinnati, Ohio, with a 10 percentage point gain, Pittsburgh with a 9 percentage point gain, Cleveland, 8 percentage point gain, San Antonio, 6 percentage point gain. So they debunk the view that progress is not possible in schools and districts across the country. We also have some top enrollment states that have made significant gains: Georgia, Florida, North Carolina, California. And encouragingly, 29 states equal or exceeded the national average of 81.4%. And 5 additional states are at 80 or crossing the 80% threshold. So a majority of the states are doing extraordinarily well. So we have a 1950s postcard of Fresno, California. This is our first West Coast Dream Team example. But look at this extraordinary story. In Fresno, California, which is part of the core, many of you know the core, and have had Joanna tell us about the extraordinary leadership in Fresno. They went from 69% in 2010 to 79% for 2014 in high school graduation rates. And they have high numbers of high poverty and minority students. They focused, there's a lot of the secret sauce to their success, but they focused on the whole child, so not just academic, but social and emotional supports, and looking at traumatized kids and young people who have struggles before they even come in the door. As Bob Putnam says, what happens before you come into school and what happens after school is as important as what happens within the school. And school sometimes is an echo chamber. They also refined their early warning and have a school quality improvement index that includes things like school climate, other indicators, social and emotional development and progress. And they focus on students who were short of college credits and have the pull to have more students meet the A to G requirements under the California system that then qualify them for four-year colleges. They also are innovating and have created this environment of collaboration across districts in the area. Our second West Coast Dream Team is Tacoma, Washington. This is a remarkable story. In the mid-2000s, they literally, all their schools, all their comprehensive high schools were on Bob Balfanz's dropout factory list. Sorry, Bob, to personalize that. I didn't mean to personalize that. But literally, they were 60% or lower graduation rates. And now, in 2013, they're at 78%. Our first feature in the first report was Tennessee, that had made 17 percentage point gains, and telling the story of how that happened. Well, Tacoma has an extraordinary story. They, too, have been focused on the whole child, social and emotional development, which Tim Shriver and others, the meta-analysis will tell you has a huge impact on both academic achievement, and also Columbia's recent report shows an 11-to-1 return on investment in social and emotional learning. So 7th and 8th graders who were low income and in foster care are guaranteed financial aid. If they graduate from high school, we'll pay for your college. I love that. We had a Texas example last year. Didn't finish high school? How about some college? this expectation that anything is possible. Also, Pathways to Promise, students who meet certain criteria, such as GPA and test scores, are accepted to four-year colleges. Unfortunately, there are some school districts, about a third of the nation's school districts are in the penalty box. 169 of them, of the top 500, made no progress or lost ground. Imagine that. Places like Rochester and Memphis and Phoenix. Bob will talk more about New York, Illinois, and Arizona losing ground. 14 states had graduation rates that make them off pace to meet the national on-pace graduation rate. I'm going to close with this and turn over to Bob. So are we Grad Nation or are we two nations? Interestingly, if you're upper or middle income in the United States, your graduation rates, it's the sea of green. All these dark green states, 90% or higher. Light green states, 85% or higher. However, if you are, James Q. Wilson, more than a decade ago, wrote a piece called Two Nations. Wilson Good remembers it, been working on it ever since. In a high poverty area and you don't have access to a good school and your family is broken down, you have a very different life trajectory than those who have just the opposite. So if you're from low income, you're a low income family, it's the sea of red, literally 79% below in all these states. So as Alma said so compellingly, it's going to be for all of us, for our kids, and that's the embrace today. So over to Bob Balfanz to get us to the end zone. Bob?
Thank you. So the question is, right, how do we get there for all kids, right? How do we get to 90 for all kids? So we thought a quick review of some reasons we had a good third quarter, and then a forecast of what the fourth quarter is going to take. So it's really, we're starting the fourth quarter of this 20-year effort, right? The fourth quarter is 2016 to 2020. We got 5 years to go to make this happen. So it's getting very serious. We can see the end zone, but we're not there, and there's some pretty tough defenses in the way. The good news, as we said, is that overall, grad rates are up, and it's spreading. The third quarter was really when success spread wide and deeper. The second quarter, early innovators pushed us forward. First quarter, we got aware of the problem. Third quarter, success spread. So that's the great news. What were some of the drivers of it? Well, our MVP is California. For much of the first and second quarter, California was in a funk. It educates about 13% of the kids, high school kids in the nation. The nation can't move if California doesn't move. The good news is in the third quarter it moved. It had a good 4-point gain in 2 years. And it was really driven by multiple districts' efforts as opposed to a big state-level policy push. So that's important to keep in mind. A couple of other places that were really important. Georgia, New Mexico, Nevada. They spent much of the first and second quarter at the bottom. Below 60%, actually in the 50s for some of that time. All of these states made big gains in the third quarter and broke 70% for the first time. In the early 2000s, there were 11 states with grad rates below 60%. I mean, in the 60s, sorry, or below. Now there's only one. I'll bet you never guess who's the one left. It's Oregon. I have to think about why that is. All right? So they are our turnaround trio. But the star of the third quarter and coming off the bench with a huge number, because this is the first year they've released cohort data. They were one of the 3 states that got waivers not to release their data. People are always suspicious. You're not releasing your data. What's the story? They came off the bench with a huge number. Kentucky has no discernible low-income, middle, high-income graduation gap. Both their low-income kids and their high and middle-income kids graduated 85%, 3 points above the national average. Right? So that's huge, right? And Kentucky is one of the poorest states in the nation with one of the highest rates of concentrated poverty. So if Kentucky can do it, there's no reason for us to say, oh, this is maybe not, it's too hard to get there for everybody. Let's see. So at some level, why Kentucky? They worked it longer and harder than anybody else. They were the first state to have state-level accountability way before NCLB. They were the first state to implement without any fuss and bother the Common Core. They had multiple long-term state commissioners, which made graduation rates a priority. They really took this sense of our kids in the Appalachian parts of Kentucky, in Louisville. They really had a statewide push. They made accountability core for both superintendents and principals' success graduation rates. They built state technical assistance systems and built networks. And they've raised the bar. So at Kentucky, it used to be you were a low-performing high school if your grad rate was 60 or below. They've now moved it, you are a low-performing high school if your grad rate is 80 or below, right? So they keep pushing it. They don't say that we've made a lot of progress. So they have this, and they've adopted a continuous improvement model. Their whole state accountability system is based on continuous improvement. So that's their strength. The bad news, as we heard, is that some states are actually going backwards, and actually their gaps are getting bigger, right? This is this whole point. It's not been like this rising tide has moved everybody forward. There's been some great demographic shift or some great social shift or a great awakening among the youth, and they've all realized we have to graduate no matter what. It's been the folks that have worked it have got better, and the folks that have not worked it or stumbled or fumbled have gotten worse, right? So 3 big states that went backwards were Illinois, New York, and Arizona. Their rates are lower in 2013 than in 2011, and their gaps are bigger. So this is not about unending progress that just takes time. It's about, like, you got to do the work and you got to figure out how to do the work, or else you stumble or fumble. What's the deal with New York? New York was a star the first and second quarter. Driven by New York City, they made some of the biggest gains and were the innovators. Well, you know, New York City is sort of in need of a second act, right? They made good progress. They're a little bit plateauing. Like many places, they have to figure out what's next. But what's really hurting New York is all their other cities. Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, my hometown, are all still in the 50s. They still have they're still at the place where it's a 50-50 proposition if you graduate or not. And they have high rates of concentrated poverty, which is a challenge, but as we saw, Fresno is not a barrier. But they have not quite figured out how to deal with that reality and are struggling. The fourth quarter, how are we going to get there? Where do we have to focus? What's the magnitude of the challenge? All right, it's 3 Rose Bowls of kids is it. We need 300,000 more graduates in each class by 2020. That's 3 Rose Bowls. That's it. That's the ball game. We fill up 3 Rose Bowls of kids that were going to drop out that now graduate. We're at 90%. That's a way to think about the magnitude. For it to be for all kids and not some kids, here's the challenge. Who has to be in that Rose Bowl? What's the makeup of that stadium? 4 out of 5 of those students in those 3 Rose Bowls have got to be low-income kids, right? That's the ball game we saw between one grad nation or 2 nations. Almost all the extra graduates we have to get between now and 2020 are low-income kids if we want 90% for all. 1 out of 3 have to be African American. 1 out of 3 have got to be Latino. 1 out of 5 are English language learners. And here's the kicker. 40% have to be students with disabilities. Imagine those 3 stadiums. To get to 90% for all, 40% of those kids in those stadiums have to be students with disabilities. That's going to be a clue on where we're struggling. But at the district and state, that may seem daunting, 3 huge Rose Bowls. That's a lot of kids. But at the district and state level, these challenges seem much more manageable. And the truth is, at the state level, we're talking about a basketball arena of kids. For the low-income challenge, in all but 3 states, all we have to do is fill up 1 basketball arena of kids that are currently dropping out and make them graduates, and we will reach that goal. That's how, when this becomes distributed across states and districts, it's a very different way to look at it. At the district level, this is a theater-level challenge. And all of those 500 districts that educate 15,000 or more kids, their challenge is to fill a theater, in most cases, of kids that are now dropping out with graduates. And we've actually put out some graphics icons on our website at the state level, just showing for all kids to get to 90%, what are we talking about? So for example, for African Americans in the state of Michigan, they've got to get 2, 4, they've got to get 7 theaters worth of kids in each graduating class to reach 90% for all. They got to get 1 arena of low-income kids, right? Showing that it makes it a much more manageable way to conceive of it. Our two big challenges as a nation, right? First, students with disabilities. We are bad. We are horrible. We don't know how to do this. We get Ds or less as a nation for students with disabilities. All the research says that between 85 to 90% of kids with a disability classified in special education can earn a regular diploma. The current graduation rate is 60%. So that's why it's a big challenge to get to 90. Most of our energy right now is not spent at the state and district level at figuring out what kind of supports these kids need to earn a regular diploma. It's spent on playing games with definitions. It's about creating different diploma tracks. It's about creating different requirements for the existing diplomas. It's about saying, oh, well, the IEP team can create its own solution for the diploma. All the energy is about definitions and routes and not supports. So we really have to wake ourselves up, because remember, 40% of kids in those 3 Rose Bowls have got to be students with disabilities. Minority students, particularly African American students. Some of our states, which have been state leaders at the national level, that we give lots of appropriate credit up here for driving the nation forward as a whole, states like Florida, states like California now, states like New York in the first and second quarters, still have rates for their African Americans in the 60s. So the states have made progress, but their African American rates are still in the 60s. If you throw in Ohio, Michigan, and Georgia, along with those first 3 who also have rates in the 60s, those states educate 40% of the African Americans in the nation. And for all their progress, they are still in the 60s for those students. Until we change that dynamic, we are not going to get to 90 for all. Similarly, for Latino students, Colorado, Arizona, Oregon, and Washington are very important places that are struggling with compared to other places to make sure that all Latino students have the tools and supports they need to succeed. So with that, we're going to turn it back to Bridge to tell us how we can do some policy work.
We're in a new era of follow the evidence. And when I look out at Michael Brown and Anne-Marie Conley and Dan Cardinale and all of you in this room, you're constantly moving toward following and building an evidence base. So I asked Russ Rumberger, what's the most comprehensive review of dropout prevention? He said the Campbell collaboration, which is 548 reports analyzing, you should actually write this down, I think. It's actually interesting. It'd be useful to go look at it. 548 reports that analyze 167 studies. And contrary to the stereotype that nothing works, the strong conclusion based on rigorous evidence was that most of these dropout prevention programs were effective in increasing high school graduation rates if they're implemented with fidelity and appropriate to the local environment. That gave me such hope. I'm not going to go through these. We're going to talk about it more with John Gompertz when he comes up. But I also wanted to highlight that we worked really hard, Phil Lovell and Bob Wise, in the context of the reauthorization of ESEA. We wrote this letter and highlighted the importance of graduation rate accountability. And everywhere we go, we hear story after story, including Kentucky. I can't imitate his wonderful accent, but the commissioner of Kentucky literally said that graduation rate accountability and what was required under federal law had an impact on what happened in Kentucky. So follow the evidence. We're also, our game plan for each state is we want to share the report and Civic Marshall Plan indices with every single governor and chief state school officer in every state and show them with more particularity than we've ever had their graduation rate gains or declines, what's required to reach 90% by the class of 2020, what are their low-performing schools. There's this data navigator that's emerging that can pinpoint where are the students, most vulnerable students in the most vulnerable schools, what would it take to keep them on track. Their grad rate gaps by populations. Bob mentioned students with disabilities. We were sort of encouraged last year by the state of Kansas, like Kentucky for low income, how it was doing better. We are horrified at the gap between students with disabilities. And when you go deeper, look at students with disabilities who are getting certificates of attendance or completion, not even regular diplomas in many of these states. So we're going to be going deeper on that. Also working with the Alliance in Columbia, economic benefits of reaching 90%, so that governors and policymakers can say, well, if you're not compelled by the moral imperative and the social imperative, at least be compelled by the economic imperative to raise graduation rates. So we would love all your help in working at the district and state level to get the word out and to highlight evidence-based work. With that, we close with thanks and welcome to the stage our team captain, the CEO of America's Promise Alliance, John Gompertz.
So I'm going to ask a couple of questions, and then I want to engage people in the audience in a conversation, questions, comments on the report and what Bridge and Bob just said. For those who are watching on the webcast, we invite you to also join, use the hashtag GradNation. So we heard a lot of, you reported a lot of data, and I know that you also have some questions about the data itself. And we have Ross Santee here from NCES and Russ Rumbarger. Ross and Russ sounds like a morning drive time show or something. But I'd actually love to engage you guys in this conversation as well. What's your level of confidence? What troubles you? What more do we need to make sure that we're standing on a solid foundation with the data? And part of that is, what can this group do to press for the information that we need to continue to drive this forward?
I mean, I think that overall, at the highest level of aggregations, the data is pretty solid. As you get down to smaller levels of aggregation, there's more room for some creative interpretations by the folks putting the data together. And I think what we have to keep pressing for is what Bridge often refers to as the cleanup crew, which is that we have this agreement to have a common definition of how we measure the graduation rate. It went a long way to giving us that comparability. There's still a few sort of micro points about how we define who's a first-time ninth grader, how we define who's a graduate, how we figure out what's a legitimate transfer in and out of the cohort. That gets very in the weeds very quickly. But if we don't make sure that people stay true and to a common mesh into that, as we get closer and closer to 2020, there's probably be more and more drift on the comparability issue.
Ross, I see you nodding your head. Can somebody bring Ross a microphone? I wonder, Ross, so if you can identify yourself and then talk about how you think about the data and what you think we need in this, in Bob's fourth quarter.
Sure. My name is Ross Santee. I'm the Associate Commissioner of the Administrative Data Division at the National Center for Education Statistics. And the adjusted cohort graduation rate comes from what I work on, which is what we refer to as administrative data. So what data do school districts and state education agencies manage about students and already have on hand in order to be utilized for creation of a rate? It tells us a lot of things, as we've all been learning and talking about today, but there's a lot more it doesn't tell us. And I think that's really important, and Bob has highlighted a few of the places where comparability is left up to states, and how comparable is really something we need to learn and continue to engage a national conversation about some of the state policies on how first-time ninth graders are defined, how regular high school diploma is defined, and some of those things. And that's going to be an important conversation as we go forward. But it's also going to be important to think about all the things that the report brings out at the state and district level about the initiatives, because the administrative data will only tell us how many students graduated with a regular high school diploma within 4 years of being a first-time ninth grader. That's what it's going to tell us. Anything about how many kids almost dropped out but didn't because they had a teacher engage with them, it's not going to be in that administrative data. There may be studies, and NCES is always looking at this through our sample surveys division, that may help us understand longitudinally what it takes for kids to stay in high school, to persist on, to pursue higher education degrees, and all of those things. So we've got a great starting point with the adjusted cohort graduation rate that does give us a lot more comparability than we used to have, but it's never going to tell us everything we need to know, and it's really important to think about it as that starting point. And I think Bob and Bridge are very good at always thinking about that and driving the report not just to the numbers, but to find the things within the numbers, go out and engage, and try to tell the stories of what we know is happening in districts where we're seeing something start to move. And I think that's the key thing, to think about it on a district and a neighborhood basis. If you're seeing movement in your district, your neighborhood, what's happening and what's leading to that movement? And if you're not, well, what's happening in places where we are seeing movement? Let's go ask those questions. Let's try to get those stories up, because the numbers are only going to tell us what we can learn from that sort of aggregated set of data state education agencies are working with, reporting out to the public, and reporting to us. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. That's really
good. Can we get a mic for Russ? So Russ, you've looked at data about this for longer than anybody in this room probably, and I'm wondering your observations about what Ross just said and what Bob said, and what the data do tell us and what else we actually need to know.
So no, I agree with the comments that were just made about it. It's the first kind of set indicator, but I think beyond that, we want to. There's a couple other things I think we still want to know. You know, we want to know for the kids who take longer than 4 years to graduate. You know, there are. If we really have a kind of grad nation mentality, we say, what are the things to get more graduates in the United States? So our goal, let's say, is to get everybody graduated in 4 years. But students who walk into high school 2 or 3 grade levels behind, immigrant kids who have been in here a few years, you know, who have to master English as well as all the requirements for a diploma, you know, it's not necessarily realistic for them to graduate in 4 years. Just like college graduation rates are 4, 5, and 6 year rates, and the NCAA recognizes 6-year grad rates from college as legitimate. We've never recognized legitimacy of a 5 or 6 year high school graduation rate. Some states have, but not the U.S. goal. So I shouldn't say, we shouldn't back away from this goal, but I'm just saying in terms of data, it'd be nice to know the kids who are almost there. And then on the other side is the dropout recovery efforts, which I know some of these organizations in this room represent. Those are also bestowing diplomas on even some recent cohort members from these cohorts, but of course older adults as well. So as part of our Grad Nation kind of measure of success, if you want to say we want everybody to have a diploma in this country, it would include those things. And then lastly, I would say in terms of wanting to know more, you know, beyond the actual number. You know, it's, in a way, a diploma is a crude indicator, you know, because there's so many different ways you can get it. I mean, first of all, we have state and local requirements that are related to that, but also the fact that, you know, we've seen pushes that I'd have anecdotal evidence, not very strong evidence, about kids who are, and systems that are kind of, quote, gaming the system in terms of getting kids. So how many Ds are we awarding to get these diplomas? You know, how many dropout recovery, credit recovery efforts have we have where students can earn a semester worth of credit in 10 hours of online instruction? You know, how much of that is happening so that the diploma on the margin for some of those kids may be a very diluted diploma and not really in this notion about college and career readiness. We haven't really talked about that. So, you know, what a diploma represents is actually highly variable and what it actually measures. And I think with more data, we can get a better sense about really how well prepared are these students that are getting diplomas. So it's kind of a more qualitative indicator or, you know, qualitative differentiation of diplomas beyond that. So, you know, not to, you know, deride the goal of the 90%, but there's more things I think we still can and will want to learn from the data.
Right. So I take away partly from your remark, Russ, that we want the term Grad Nation to mean something and to have a meaning that goes beyond just more people having a diploma, but more people really being ready to go on to college and or career in whatever order. So really good comments. I'd like to call on Reba Dominski from Target, who's one of the sponsors of this and has long been involved in the whole Grad Nation effort. Reba?
Thank you. Good morning. I have to start by saying on behalf of everyone at Target that it's really an honor to partner with America's Promise Alliance and all of you to improve educational outcomes for children. And when I give you a little bit of context, I do have a question, but I want to give you some context first. Target's made a big commitment to education. We are on track to give $1 billion for education later this year. And that commitment is based on, thank you. Thank you. And that commitment is based on a belief. And that belief is that every child deserves a quality education regardless of race or socioeconomic status. And that commitment is more than just words. it's actions. So we have been partnering with Strive Together and the United Way Worldwide on the ground in communities across the country to determine how do you scale and sustain collective impact. In our hometown market, the Twin Cities of Minneapolis and St. Paul, we work with the Northside Achievement Zone to close the glaring opportunity gaps for students in our own community. But I'm going to be very honest with this group. We are frustrated with the lack of meaningful progress. In fact, the most recent data from Grad Nation shows that Minnesota has the largest gap in the nation, 24.1%, between low-income and high-income students. So my question today is, how do we close this persistent gap between high-income and low-income students in Minnesota and in other states that are facing similar challenges?
So I would say one thing is actually give Connecticut a call. Because in our report, no, Connecticut. What's the number? Connecticut has been in competition with Minnesota for the largest gap for quite a while. Both sort of similar, both high wealth and pockets of poverty states, if you want a broad caricature. And most recently, the governor of Connecticut led a serious statewide effort. He got a state appropriation to build up some reserve funds so they could actually go after the lowest performing schools and lowest performing districts and not have to depend on federal money. So we could have a substantial and secure funding source. They built a technical assistance apparatus in the State Department of Education and brought in external partners and just really went after, with data, those districts and those schools within them that were producing most of their low-income dropouts. And in the most recent past year, they've closed their gap by 6 points. It's still a big gap, but it was big movement. And so that sort of was an evidence that if you really go at it hard and think about combining school reform with enhanced student supports, guided by data, and some policy changes around it, and both building up some of the policy and funding base so you can go after it in a sustained way and not be dependent on external federal short-term money, you can close the gap.
Sarah, two seats behind Reba, you want to talk a little bit about what's going on in Minnesota? Because this is not the first year it's jumped out at us, and I know that there's a statewide effort in Minnesota. So Sarah Dixon.
Sure, hi, thank you, John. It's a pleasure to be here. Yes, I echo that, being from Minnesota, and we have launched Grad Minnesota, comparable to Grad Nation. So it's a statewide effort made up of high-level people on an advisory level. And in fact, I brought the packet. I'd be happy to share it with you. We just finished a packet. Oops, that's yours. Anyway, I have it here for our elected officials to really look at recommendations moving forward to close the gap. The commissioner's chair, we've got high-level governor's office, the commissioner, and Minnesota Alliance with Youth is the organization that I run, collectively looking at how do we close the gap. Working a lot with Twin Cities Public Television. We're doing a big initiative on the belief gap because I do believe in Minnesota it's about race and privilege and equity and those types of things. So we're really having a lot of conversation about that, bringing young people together, adults at the table to really try to solve this issue. So we've developed 7 key recommendations, certainly including a lot of what you talked about in terms of looking at the data, the early warning systems, really having the system be youth and family focused rather than focused on the educators in the building. Minnesota is a high union state, and so we want to make sure that we're really there for the young people that need it the most.
Good, thanks. Thanks very much.
You.
It's a great model of a statewide effort and also a state that has had so much success with actually upper and middle income kids that's what drives the disparity, but it also highlights the challenge. You want to
Say one more thing.
go ahead? I have to stop talking, I think.
Oh, okay. I think one more thing I just wanted to add because I really liked what you said about the local level. I think the other piece we have a statewide entity really looking at it, but we're also working at we call them Grad Minnesota communities, similar to Grad Nation communities. So we just applied for a grant to really further that work because we know, again, if work can happen at the community level, community by community, as well as at the state, using sort of both those strategies of systems and direct really is powerful.
I want to build on that actually because in Kentucky is also relevant in addition to Connecticut. The commissioner of Kentucky told us that by publicizing by county these graduation rate gaps. So think a little Floyd County, Kentucky was right next door to Martin County, Kentucky, where Lyndon Johnson launched on Tom Fletcher's porch the war on poverty many years ago. And Floyd County had, you know, some of the lowest performing high schools in the entire state. And it's right in the middle of Appalachia. They're now one of the top 5 performers in the state. And the commissioner said, I asked him, what's the secret sauce? He said, one is understanding the gaps and publicizing those gaps. 2, not being shy about working holistically around those students. The SNAP program was just evaluated, and it showed that those who had access to SNAP, to food stamps, had an 18 percentage point higher graduation rate than those who didn't. And so we shouldn't be shy about effective federal funding and programs. And the third was that principals and superintendents in all these counties are actually evaluated on how they're closing these gaps over time. So it's built into the accountability system. And I think those are 3 interesting lessons out of Kentucky as well.
I think I've been listening to Bob on this for a long time. Working the problem and accountability, working the problem and accountability, and throwing a lot of persistence. They seem to be really critical in this. I'm curious, a couple questions here about the data, and then I'm going to turn to LaShawn and Rihanna for a comment. What surprised you when you got into this report? What did you find surprising? Bob?
So I think on the positive side was that we found these 125 districts that collectively were majority minority and majority low income that on average gained 8 graduation points, 8 percentage points over a 2-year period, which shows you there is a subset of districts that are really working the problem hard and well. And they are not just the advantaged districts that are doing it. So that was a very positive surprise, and we got that data quite late, and so we haven't really been able to dig deep into understanding what's behind that, except for a few of the case studies we did. And then just balancing it, that there is an equal number of districts that are demographically very similar that were flat or went negative, which really drove home to us that that can't be broad demographic, broad economic, broad social change trends, because you have quite similar districts going quite different ways.
So every time you do a report, you do a big research project, you learn a bunch of answers, but you learn almost the same number of questions. So I'm curious, coming off of what Ross and Russ said about the data, but what do you want to know more about, and what do you think we need to know more about?
I think, it's interesting. We met with NCES and identified a dozen issues that we call it the data cleanup crew to ensure better comparability across states. And one of the areas that I found really frightening was 2 areas, actually. One was students with disabilities and what constituted a regular diploma, and how many states, some states that are making some extraordinary progress on closing the gap with students with disabilities, are actually issuing degrees that aren't all that valuable. They call them certificates of attendance, certificates of completion. So we'd like to go deeper on and actually go into Kansas and see, is their integrated model effective, and why is it effective? And then go into those states that we think are flying off the rails. That's one area. Another thing I'd like to learn more about is, to Russ's point, we're actually going to do a report, because they say, are we just creating more diploma mills? Are we just getting graduation rates, up? But the diplomas don't mean much in terms of college and career readiness. So we're going to do a report that shows the relationship between indicators of college and career readiness and those states and districts, that 124 that are increasing these high school graduation rates. So we have stronger linkages. Jamie Marasotis's report, there is a second Grad Nation goal, right?
Yeah.
On college completion, shows that we're pointing in the right direction, but we've never really made a strong relationship between these 2 efforts.
Talk for a second about homeless kids also, Bridge.
So I went up to the Hill, and I wanted to call out Corporation for Public Broadcasting has American Graduate. How many of you have seen their work in local? So in more than 100 affiliates across the United States, thanks to Alma Powell and America's Promise Alliance, they're literally covering this issue every day, raising awareness, not only the problem, but solutions. And they just released a new documentary film called The Homestretch, and I had to go up and speak on Capitol Hill about it. And in learning more about it, I learned there are 1.2 million students in kindergarten through 12th grade who are homeless in the United States. Imagine your own child being homeless. I mean, what this complete outrage it is. And so we're actually doing a national report on youth homelessness and educating young people who are homeless. It's stigmatized. A lot of young people don't even talk about it. In fact, Rihanna will share her story, I'm sure, when she talked about it to us for our report. But that's that's sort of a silent epidemic within the larger epidemic, is this unaccompanied youth homeless problem.
Bob, what do you want to know more about?
Well, we really need to be serious about getting to 90 for all kids everywhere is that arena and theater level challenge at the state level. And we really have to do deep state level data maps, because each state, there's great commonalities, but each state has its own twists and turns. Very micro issues that are going to be hard to get your head around, but are going to really change how that state does. For example, are charter schools in the district or their own district? Are there ways that you can push kids from one type of school to another and then make everyone's grad rates look better or not? Are there places of great hidden success that we're not understanding because we haven't quite gone deep enough at a state-by-state level to fill that arena up? Which districts are we talking about? Which schools are we talking about? And what does it currently look like?
You know, one of the things just to highlight that I was surprised by was that we could actually get to 90% in an inequitable way. That in the higher and middle income kids, if we keep pushing the gas, we could get beyond 90, and that we need an equity map, and that 4 out of 5 of the kids need to be low income. And that was something that was reinforced.
So for all of us, Bridge talked about doing the work on silent epidemic and the work that we did just last year on Don't Call Them Dropouts, and the work that's going on right now with the Support at Target, again, talking to young people who have left school before graduating to try to understand better what those challenges are and what responses we need. So we want the voice of young people throughout this meeting. I want to call on LaShawn and Rihanna for a reaction to what you've heard and some comments. Here comes our mic.
I'll stand up. I'm sorry. So thank you guys for having me first and foremost. It's a pleasure to be here. As they mentioned, my sister and I's story was included in the report, and I hope that you guys find our stories to be beneficial in your work moving forward. So I just wanted to quickly share 3 recommendations. I have a whole list of them, but I'll just share 3.
All right.
So the first one is that I think schools should have discipline policies that teach valuable lessons opposed to kicking them out and they become even further disconnected. I myself was finding myself getting suspended and being kicked out of school, suspended, and falling further behind. So I think that discipline policy should definitely improve in that area. Secondly, students should understand, and education, they should understand the connection between education and careers. Because in my community, having a high school diploma is kind of like the end point. Like, okay, I got my high school diploma, I'm done. And they don't really see, you know, you need to go on in further education. So they need to understand that it's important to graduate high school, but it's also important to go on to post-secondary education or pursue a career. Thirdly, teachers should be trained to be culturally competent, especially in low-income neighborhoods, because these youth are dealing with a lot of trauma and a lot of issues. Just like he mentioned, you give students SNAP, and all of a sudden, 18% increase. So if teachers are able to identify and become those mediators and say, hey, what's going on? Why are you not paying attention? Maybe because he's hungry and he doesn't have the capacity to do that. So paying attention to those type of things. I myself, even though I dropped out of high school due to many of the reasons that I mentioned before, I got connected to Youth Field, where they provided a lot of those services. And now, even though I dropped out, I'm now about to graduate in a few weeks. I just it was not an easy journey, but I'll be graduating in 3 weeks with my bachelor's, and I'm actually in the process of applying for a master's at Northeastern University. If anyone from Massachusetts
all right.
knows that. You know, so there is second chances is definitely possible, and if we implement these policies, I'm sure there will be a lot of stories similar to mine. So I would like to introduce my sister, who had a different path than I did, so she can kind of talk about her journey.
All right. It's okay, Rihanna.
That's all right.
We
Go
love
ahead.
you, Rihanna.
Yeah, we got you.
Yes, stand up so I can see you.
We got your back.
Hello, I'm Mariana. Thank you, Sean. Prepared me to see that I had different decisions to make. Growing up, our family struggled with unstable housing and other issues related to poverty. Though I went to a high school that was better than most in my Boston community, I too got off track. But thanks to the example my brother and family members set for me, I was determined to find my way back. I graduated with honors from my high school and am the only one of my friends to go on to college. I will graduate from Long Island University May of 2017 with my degree in nursing.
All right.
I agree with Sean that discipline policies should be constructive and to keep kids in school. I also recommend having caring adults that can help guide students. Part of the reason that I fell off track was that I didn't have anyone in school to turn to. Thank you for the opportunity for us to share our story and for making positive opportunities available for more young people in our country.
Beautiful.
Awesome. So stay tuned. This afternoon, we're going to talk a whole lot about discipline policies and the impact that discipline policies are having on graduation. So stay tuned for that conversation this afternoon. You know, each year the Grad Nation Report tells us how we're doing, and it has been encouraging, but it also tells us, as these guys suggested, where we need to focus our efforts. And I think we've got that again. And I want to thank Bob and Bridge for this presentation, for the fabulous report, for the really good conversation. I want to thank those who have watched on the webcast, and encourage those of you who were watching on the webcast to rejoin us at 1 o'clock when General Powell and Professor Bob Putnam have a conversation about the opportunity gap that we're talking about just right here. So thanks very much on that.
All right. Thanks for the conference.
You're waiting for your cut on the webcast.
now, yeah.